And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, July 26, 2019. Busy week, lots of information. Let's get right into our story. We're going to talk about the climate again, and now a new emergency bill. You probably didn't even hear about it. They want to put an emergency bill through to be able to start spending money now to change the climate. Cultural change. We talked about that last week. We're going to bring in another aspect of showing how our nation continues to change what we believe and how we are founded. Then Israel's borders. Now, you can like this little segment here, Israel's borders. You wonder why all the conflict in the Middle East? Well, there's a deeper root than anybody's telling you that the Bible has hidden in the mysteries of God about the borders of Israel. We'll talk about that today. But let's talk about something first. It's kind of, I threw this in this morning, but I got to tell you, because the irony of the liberal left socialist agenda. They're very generous when it comes to other people's money. So I just had to bring this in. And by the way, Bernie Sanders, as you see up here, Bernie Sanders is going to be focused in 2 or 3 of our little segments here. He's pushing for the minimum $15 wage. You probably heard about it. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? All right, Bernie Sanders told the federal contract workers striking over wages on Wednesday that he is introducing legislation to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Well, they've been talking about that for a while. All right. Speaking to hundreds of cheering workers gathered outside of a Senate office building, he said that the working 40 hours a week have a right to be living, have a right not to be living in poverty. Well, I agree with this so far. So, in fact, you see here, you know, U.S. kids say $2.10 or $10.10 is too little. So this is what we're saying loudly and clearly is $7.25 an hour. The current federal minimum wage is a starvation wage, he said, and has got to be raised to a living wage. Nobody argues that $7.25 is starvation wages. I don't know how anybody can live on that. You certainly can't raise a family. I don't even know how single people can live on that and try to focus on what they're doing on that kind of wage. By the time you take out taxes, Social Security, you're back home living with mom and dad. So there's no way to make that work. But this is not the kicker. All right, here's the kicker going to be coming up, right? Oh, my little font didn't work. What I've got here that you can't see is that he says businesses who don't pay at least $15 an hour are exploiting their workers. All right? They're exploiting their workers if they don't pay at least $15 an hour. So he came out with that. Just a day or so later, the problem arises as Bernie Sanders' campaign responds to $15 minimum wage controversy with better hours for their staff. Come to find out, he's not paying his staff $15 an hour. Whatever the salaries they were being paid, he was making them work up to 60 hours a week. And so they was not making what he was demanding everybody else pay for. So when the argument pursued, he said, well, then you're going to have to start paying more for your insurance. So the arguments pursued. So here's what the Washington Post wrote. Labor fight roils Bernie Sanders' campaign as workers demand $15 an hour pay as the candidate proposed nationwide. So eventually what he says is, we're going to cut your hours. He's not giving them any more money. Y'all hear that? He's not giving them any more money to make the $15. He's going to cut their hours because they don't have the money to pay them. Now, here's the irony. Neither do many businesses around the country. Many of them are focused, and this is affecting the small companies, the mom and pop shops, who are going to have to wind up raising everything, who are competing with the Walmarts and the big companies. So it's a mess. I mean, I don't have an easy fix for it, but here's the thing I'm pointing out. The socialists who want to give away everybody else's, when it comes to them, don't touch me, everybody else change but me. And that seems to be the way things work. And I just had to bring that in to show you, because the irony of the hypocrisy is beyond belief. All righty. Now, let's get into the stories I want to get into. Man on the Moon, we talked about this last week. And actually, I brought up this picture that you see in your lower left-hand corner. that we brought it up, and that's an artist rendition. I just really love that picture, especially when you look at his mask, and you can see the Apollo, the lunar craft sitting on the moon, and the astronaut out there working. And so I wanted to follow up this week because when we presented our program, we were just ahead of the 20th, which was the anniversary. So on the 20th, they had quite a number of specials that came out, and a couple of them that we want to talk about here today. We're going to show you actually in video. So I'm going to have a video coming up, and I don't know if you saw it or not. The news did talk a little bit about it, but I'm surprised it didn't get more information, is that on the Washington Monument, as you're looking at right there in that picture, the Washington Monument, they actually took the Apollo 11 spacecraft and they projected it on the monument, so it is actually looking like it's actually moving up. And then beside it, they had these huge screens with the sound and music and everything for their audience, and that was sponsored by the Smithsonian and the National Air and Space Museum, and they went all out, and it was quite a program. It's a 17-minute program that they ran. So I've got about a 4-minute segment that I took out of that just to show you a little bit of what it was like, because it's absolutely phenomenal what they actually were able to do. So if we're ready, let's play that video, and I'll come back in just a moment.
10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. And now, if America's new spacecraft succeeds, we will have literally reached the stars before midnight tonight. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. If I were to say, my fellow citizens, we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communication, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then returning safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first, before this decade is out. 1 minute, 55 seconds, under the final mission, flight to land, first men on the moon. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. T-minus 60. 55 seconds and counting. Rockets in a real smooth countdown. We're on internal power, we're going to have to at this time.
it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4.
Well, I cut it off there but the video actually runs for 17 minutes, and you can actually go online and you can find it. But the creativity of putting all that together and building it on a Washington Monument and putting it out there for sound, and those screens next to it, you can't tell by their size, but they're a minimum of 30 feet high that runs across, and they run on both sides. So anyway, I thought that was quite a tribute to the being able to stay on the moon for the 50th anniversary. All right, we got one more video we're going to show you at the mid-break. So, and this is by Google, and they put together a little animation. So get the kids ready; they might enjoy that. All right, follow the money. Now let's pick up on this. As we began last month talking about follow the money, how the central banks were ditching the dollar for gold. So then we did a follow-up. That was early in June. Then we did a follow-up on the 28th, June 28th, and we referred back to our original program. So the reason we were doing that, I wanted to give everybody a tip and some ideas on things to look for to help you prepare financially for down the road when things begin to get a little bit tough. So if you were watching our program, all right, so right before 628, 621, we began talking about saving money on silver and how silver actually works in our society against the issues of what's taking place around the rest of the world. For example, here's a chart, and we showed you in April 2011 that the peak of silver, the highest it ever was on April 2011, was $55.21. All right, that was 2011. That's when the economy was really tanking, and they wasn't sure if they're going to be able to get out of the hole. Then by November 2018, the price had dropped all the way down to $14.32. There literally were a couple of times that silver actually went into the $13 range, right? Into the $13 range. And that happened again recently. And that was what we consider as a bottoming out, right? This is a bottoming out. So then, in June 19, this past month, the average silver was $14.74. So it's been running in the $14 range now for a little bit of a period of a time, dropped into 13, is because the economies around the world had problems, but they were fairly stationary. But then issues began to take place. And this is where I brought this in and why I brought it in for everybody who's paying attention here. February 2008, look at the prices in February 2008, $24.01. See how much higher that is. So why was that? Well, that was the beginning of what the collapse would be of the economic system in the United States. By October 2008, all right, so just a few months later, it was back down to $11.48. During that period of time, we were telling everybody to be concerned about the economy because the Feds said that when this issue came up, that they had everything under control, the finances were fine, no banks were going to collapse, everything was under control. The Fed said they fixed it. At the same time, we were focusing and said that they were lying to you, because I was looking at the economy and I was looking at the way things were. And we had just began with, this was not a fix. This was a delay, because they pumped money into the banking system to stabilize everything. But the mortgage system was so inflated around the world, nobody knew how deep it went. All right, so when you thought everything was fine, it finally blew up. It actually just blew up in the economy, all right? So that's when it went to $55.21. See the jump, all right? So it went in this incredible jump to $55. So today now we're back down to $15. Why? Because the economy is fairly stable again. But things are now beginning to take place that's breaking loose and beginning to focus with the silver. So let me tell you now where we're going to go with this, and how I'm going to show you in just 1 month what has taken place, and going back and bringing in what we're talking about. Now I want to tell you this: I'm not a broker. I'm not an investment counselor. What I'm giving you is information that you can count on from Scripture, what God says is going to happen. Knowing these things, how do you position yourself personally and financially, knowing these things are going to take place? God says that when the bridegroom comes, the church is asleep, but half of them are still prepared, the other half are not. So what I'm telling you is that there's a way that you can help semi-prepare yourself economically to take advantage of when things are about to take place. This is just one of them. And so I recommend for people who have extra money that can sit in the bank for savings, take a little bit out, look for the right time when the silver drops again to prices, to pick up just a little bit, so that when things get out of control, as I'm about to show you what happened in just 1 month, and when things get really bad, so that by that time you can get rid of your silver and take care of a bill or take care of some food or something before they start throwing it all onto the streets. Eventually they're going to throw everything into the street. It's not going to be good for anything. But there's a period of time before that takes place. So now, let's get to the chart of what happened. This was in June, all right? So in June 16, June 6, on the 18th, silver was at $14.83. 2 days later, all right, just 2 days later, look at that chart, how it went up, and that was because Iran has shot down an American drone. All right, so you can see the price of silver as it went back up. It went up to $15.55. Not a big deal. But that's simply because of Iran shooting down a drone. One time, that's all that was. So it jumped up just that much. By Friday, when it looked like the United States really wasn't going to attack, when the president decided he wasn't going to go kill a bunch of Iranians because of it, things began to settle back down again with the silver. And you see it went back down to $15.42. Your precious metals are built around the stability or the instability of a nation and events that happen around the world. So does oil, by the way. Oil does the same thing. So this is another example of how fast things change. This is more current. This is this month, all right? So that was last month with one event showing you what took place. Now this is this month. So what we're looking at here in this chart that you're looking at that's up there right now is that this is just 3 days of how the silver was affected when Iran again began to step up and increase the hostilities against the United States and other nations. This was on Wednesday, July 17th. The price of silver was $14.83. That's how it began the day when the news came out that the Iran had shot down a drone, or we had shot down an Iranian drone. I can't remember which one that was. The very next day, look at the price of silver. It is in red. On that red line you're looking at, it went all the way up. It began over $16 an ounce. Then by that Friday, the 19th, we see it was a huge spike, and then it dropped back down again. So right there, where you're looking at on the chart, so if we can bring that, if we had the chart up, yeah, see that chart? See that spike? You know what that spike was? That's when the Iranians that we found, and it was announced that Iran had seized the tanker from Great Britain. So right there, you see what happened. So, I mean, it just immediately, what do people do? They move their money into precious metals. So why am I telling you all this? Because as the economy gets bad in years ahead, not yet, you got plenty of time right now. I don't know how much plenty of time is, but I mean, I've got a few years, it looks like, is that when these things happen, what you're looking at right now is going to be magnified to some incredible amount of space. All right, so you ready for this? By the end of the day, all right, look what happens. You see how it drops down by the end of the day? All right, so why did that happen? All right, because things settled down because Great Britain said they're not going to retaliate and go attack Iran, that they were going to take and decide how they were going to handle that in a different fashion rather than attacking Iran. So when it looked like it wasn't going to escalate, people immediately moved their money out of silver. So, I mean, that's just in one day. You've seen this huge spike, how things begin to work. So now, let's go on. So going on, so what happens? Iran seizes the British tanker. We watched the silver go up. By the end of the day, they turn loose. They're not going to do that. So you look at here on the bottom box, what I've got in the chart, it reached a high of $16.66. The low went down to $15.49. So my point is I'm bringing all this out so that you, at any time you want to, can go online and you can find out for yourself, watch what things go on and begin to get a feel of how things work. Is that if you want to find the real news, forget about the pundits on TV. Forget about all those people who supposedly know everything going to tell you, is follow the money. These guys know what's going on more than anybody, what's going on. So now, on Tuesday now, okay, that the silver settled, this is today, 6:23. We're taping on Tuesday. The silver now, when I left the house today, I looked at it one last time, was already up to $16.49. So over the past month, we began to watch. When I said, listen, this would be a good time to look into if you can. All right, so I don't say put a lot of money into it, but if you have some spare money and if it's sitting in the bank, you're not going to get much interest, if you get any interest at all. But here's what's showing you just one time. In June, I showed you the average was $14.74. Here we are just about a month later, and silver today, as I left the house, was $16.49. It's up 12% in just 1 month, with just a little bit of disruption. You see how that works? So now, if you were going to be able, I wouldn't do this in day trade, and I wouldn't buy and wouldn't sell, I wouldn't fool with any of that. But I'm showing you how things can get out of control, and if you're in a position where God can bless you, when things get out of control, there's an exit point, you get out, and the funds that you make off all this kind of stuff, pay a bill if you got a bill, buy some food, do something that's going to be beneficial for you and your family. So this is just one thing. We're going to talk about a lot more of these things in preparing before the return of Jesus Christ. Talking about people who go crazy with saving stuff for the preppers and everything, but there are things you should be doing. And I'm going to try to walk you through that, not to take your eyes off of God, but the example in the book of Exodus from Joseph is God says, listen, this is all going to collapse in Egypt. So Joseph, here's what I want you to do. Prepare. Remember the dreams? God is doing the same thing for his people. Before he comes back, he says he does nothing till he reveals his secret unto his servants first. Are we in the time of Exodus, at the beginning of a 7 years of plenty, as we prepare for a 7 years of lean? We could be. And so that's why I'm bringing this out to you today. So I'm sharing with you things I never shared before. And I know I'm sticking my neck out on the line. Some people will say that you're out here. But let me say again, I am not a broker. But what I'm telling you, because I have studied this thing in history now for 20 years, how this stuff works, and knowing what God says is coming versus how man's greed reacts. And you've seen that. I showed you that today. Shows you how you can prepare yourself for when things get really bad, how when everybody else collapses, that God will bless you. Because Joseph and his family moved in power and prominence when everything else around them collapsed. So anyway, who knows? Maybe that's what God will do his people. He says, no harm will come nigh thy dwelling. I believe that, and if you follow the scripture, you should believe it too. It's not a time to get panicky. It's not a time to feel bad. It's a time to lift your head high and say, finally, this is all going to be over. Jesus Christ is preparing to come back to this world. All right, let's move on. Let's move on. Again, I spend a little too much. You know, I want to, from time to time, I know I'm digressing here again, but from time to time, it's important that we take some time, stuff we think we know, and actually just talk a little bit about it and think it through. And I know I use a little more time than I should, but I want to put some thoughts into your head to be able to tie them into Scripture and current events, because it'll benefit you in the years that comes. All right, climate emergency bill. Here, remember this, we only have 11 years to make changes, and that's by 2030. So now they want to pass bills now. Fortunately, this one didn't actually make it anywhere yet, but they want to pass the bills to start spending money for climate change. By the way, did you hear about California? They just passed a law that all new houses built by 2020 cannot have natural gas in them. I don't know if y'all heard that yet or not. Which, no natural gas, so it has to be green friendly for that home. Now they can have electricity, but what's interesting though is the power plants who feed the electricity run on natural gas. I'm not making this up. This is your socialist dollar at work. So you can't have natural gas because that's a climate problem, but you can have electricity who runs off of natural gas. That's not a problem. You figure that one out. Anyway, let's go on. Bernie Sanders says the scientific community is telling us in no uncertain terms that we have fewer than 12 years to transfer our energy system away from fossil fuels toward energy efficiency and sustainable energy. He said if we're going to leave this planet in a state that's healthy, inhabitable for our children, grandchildren, and future generations, this is a moral imperative. We have no choice. It's interesting he used the word a moral imperative, right? There's nothing moral about our society. And God says, because there's nothing moral about it, you're going to have no future. So the whole thing is an absolute lie. All right, so now, going on in his emergency declaration, he said, the havoc that will soon be wrought by climate change is unfathomable. It is a crisis, which is represented by Earl Blumenauer, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Senator Bernie Sanders, which they demanded yesterday, which was just a couple weeks ago, from the federal government. They said it's a needed step towards winning the Green New Deal because they have to force the law because nobody will vote for it. In fact, when they tried to bring the Green New Deal up before Congress and Senate, nobody voted for it. Everybody knew it was nonsense. And if they get reelected, they couldn't vote for it. So now, going on with Sanders, he says there are many, many challenges facing our country, he said. But the top of the list must be the essential threat to our planet in terms of damage to the climate the change is doing and will do. All right, so in the resolution, calling for the national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization of our resources and the labor of the United States at a massive scale to halt, reverse, mitigate, and prepare for the consequences of the climate emergency and to restore the climate for future generations. Well, we're about the only nation that basically will do it. And the only problem is now, without the United States, they really don't have enough money to do anything, so that's where the problem comes in. This is what they said, and this is what I want to focus on. The sponsors described the need for the mobilization of the nation's resources on the labor par with the country when they entered World War II. You know, this is our generations, this is our time, they're saying, right? But let me show you what they're talking about when they're talking about entering into this. The budget. Let's talk about the budget in the terms of where we are today. The federal budget in World War II increased 1939. It was $8.9 billion. Right? $8.9 billion. And 6 years later, it was averaging $95 billion. It was massive. Right? Do you see the amount of increase at that particular time? Putting that in perspective, there's the chart. All right, there's a chart. You see that spike? All right, so in that, and what you're looking at there, in the middle with the first blue, you see on the bottom left, that first blue low one, that's the New Deal. That was Roosevelt with the New Deal. That's also the beginning of the change of the Constitution. That took the money from one person to give it to another. Before that, before the New Deal, it was unconstitutional to do that. They could not do it because that's what Great Britain did. That was part of the reason we fought for our freedom to get away from that type of tyranny. Well, we changed the Constitution and over the course of 10 years brought things in. But look at the debt. If we get back up to that screen, look at the debt grow from 30 to 40. All of that had nothing to do with war. That was all increasing spending. That was called the New Deal. Now we want to do the Green New Deal just before World War II. See the spike on World War II? That was how that grew and during the war. So now, let me give you a chart. Here's the chart from 1790 to 2018. In this chart, what they're focusing on pretty much or the war debt. The war debt, which is the debt to GDP, which is gross domestic product. That's how much we produce as a nation. Our debt producing against what we produce. So in the beginning, the Revolutionary War, obviously it was going to spike because it was just getting started, right? The period of 1790. You have War of 1812. Look at the spike. Look at the Civil War, the spike. War brings about debt. It brings about economy expansion, but it brings about debt at the same time. All right, so now, here's 1918. Look at the debt that grew there. You see the beginning of 1913, which the Federal Reserve was created, which allowed the government now to control how the money is going to be tapering with interest rates or no interest rates and trying to control inflation and things like that. And that's a private company, by the way, telling the government how it operates. So now, there's 1918. So now look at the Great Depression, what I just showed you with the New Deal with Roosevelt, how it began, and eventually by 1941 to 1946, the debt to gross domestic product grew to 118%. In other words, we're spending more than we're taking in. By the way, that's where we are today. We spend more than we can take in for our debt, so we can't get it down. So here we have 1995, and then all the way till today. And that last growth, that last part of the growth is depending upon not just a war, because you got 1995, the war at the Middle East, and with Bush, the first Bush, and then the second Bush. But all of this is from 2001, right? 2001 till today. And it's because of what we're putting out to protect ourselves from our enemies. Look what God says. All right, terror, Leviticus 26. If you despise my statutes, or if your soul abhors my judgments, so that you do not perform all my commandments, but break my covenant, I will also do this to you. I will even appoint terror over you. So now one of the biggest problems we face today is terror within our country and abroad. And God says because we did not obey his word, that was going to happen to us. So you looked at the debt from 2001 to where we are today. It is massive. No other nation on the face of the earth spends a tenth of what we spend to try to protect ourselves. Why? Because we have been appointed terror over us. He says, wasting disease and fever, which shall consume your eyes and cause sorrow in your heart. Talking about the physical conditioning of our nation. You know that's happening now. And he says, and you shall sow your seed in vain, and your enemies shall eat it. We've been talking about that all year with the economy and the weather patterns, how they're changing. By the way, we sit here in New Orleans, you know what's coming through? A very rare midsummer cold front. By the time it's us, it's only going to be cool. But they said this is very rare. They've almost never seen it. That our temperatures dropping from where they're 95, 99 in New York, they're going to be down here in the mid-80s in New Orleans. Unusual at this time of year. They said they haven't really seen this. They can't remember when, which is another problem. And then they're talking about it may turn into a tropical wave or tropical system in the Gulf. And who knows? They said give it a 20% chance of turning into another tropical system. Amazing. We just got finished with one. Going on, verse 17, I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated by your enemies, and those who hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when no one pursues you. That's a pretty good picture of where we are as our nation today. All right, one more section before we get out of this and close the middle half of the program. Last week we talked about changing our culture, and we talked about removing a very valuable wall mural in California called the Life of Washington. So this week I want to talk about the culture now, not just talking about things that are in paintings and how things are changing, but how our actual culture telling us how to live and what to think is changing. All right, and this is one I'm calling Dissolving Our Bonds with Israel. All right, this is Omar again. Ilhan Omar is amid of the Gaza rocket attacks. Ilhan Omar demands an end to the occupation. It always goes back to the problems they face in the Middle East is because Israel exists. All right, they're occupying the land. In other words, get out. It's amazing how mad they got when somebody said, "Y'all get out." Well, that's exactly what they're doing to Israel. Get out. We don't want you here no more. In fact, Iran wants to destroy them, take them off the face of the earth, as well as the United States. Isn't it funny how it always comes back, it's reversed to what you're being accused of? You ever had that in your life? Somebody accuses you of something, they're the ones doing it? That's the way Satan works, and that's what's working on here. Anti-Israel resolution brought to the House of the U.S. Representatives in America. Now, this is very deceiving when you first read what's going on here. This is the anti-Israel resolution as it's termed. It doesn't say that, though. It says this is House Resolution 496, affirming that all Americans have the right to participate in boycotts in pursuit of civil and human rights at home and abroad, as protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. There by itself sounds fine. I first read it and said, well, no problem here. I mean, that's freedom of speech. We have a right if we want to boycott. But that's not the issue here. The issue is including the boycott against Israel because they exist. It doesn't mention Israel or BDS, but that is the goal. All right, so that's the real issue here. This is from the Jewish Journal. Omar introduces pro-BDS resolution and compares BDS to the Boston Tea Party. All right, so BDS is to boycott and diverse against Israel. In other words, no more doing business with Israel, right? But why? Because they're the ones who are occupying the land of the Palestinians. What is BDS? BDS stands for the movement to boycott and divest from and sanction Israel. In other words, they want to sanction Israel for their violence, of all things. Isn't that interesting? For their violence, all right? They introduced a resolution supporting the boycott and divestment and sanctions in the movement July 16th, which drew the analogy to BDS and the Boston Tea Party. In other words, they're doing no different than we did here in America when they decided that no more taxation without representation. Basically, that's what the Boston Tea Party was. It was the tyranny. But it's not Israel who's creating the tyranny. It's the ones who are with the BDS and what the Arabs are doing over there. It says, Omar called out, listen to this, an end of Israel occupation. That's where this is going. This is a U.S. state representative who's in our Congress who's calling for an end to Israeli occupation. And what she's saying is the bill needs to be approved because it's part of our First Amendment right that we as a nation need to boycott Israel because they're occupying the land that doesn't belong to them. That's what's taking place. Now, what did I just tell you a few minutes ago? It's interesting how those who accuse you of something, they're actually doing it. Because that's what's going on right here. That's what's going on right here. Let's go on and finish this out now. She also said this. You ready for this? You can't make this up. Omar invoked the boycott of a Nazi Germany in resolution supporting Israel boycotts. In other words, it's just like the United States who was boycotting Hitler when he was destroying all the Jews. It's equating to the same thing here, as if Israel is like Hitler destroying all the nation around them. That's what this is telling us. It says Americans of conscience have a proud history of participating in boycotts to advocate human rights abroad, including boycotting Nazi Germany in the March of 1933 to October 1941 in response to the dehumanization of the Jewish people and what led up to the Holocaust, Omar said in the resolution. That is the comparison to what she's saying and why she's introducing the bill. This is absolute hypocrisy and nonsense. And it's in the U.S. Senate. God says, if you bless Israel, you will be blessed. If you curse Israel, you will be cursed. And as if we as a nation allow these things to take place, we will continue to bring on the wrath of God on our own nation. Why do you think the news media is so pushed against everything else we do and support this kind of stuff? Because the liberal media is pushing the evil agenda that wants to bring this nation down to its knees. And that's where you're looking at. And now we have the leadership in our Congress, in this nation, pushing for those same agendas. Unbelievable. So now, Israel. I want you to take a moment. I'm going to slow this down for just a second. Israel, I want you to hear what I'm about to tell you, how important this is. Israel is the only nation that has ever existed to have its borders set, defined, and recorded by the Creator of the universe, to be preserved throughout all history for all mankind to see. God did that because he knew Satan in his utter vengeance to destroy mankind, would lie to the people, to the world, and to say that these people stole his land. That's what's going on now. Let me read that one more time. Israel is the only nation that has ever existed to have its borders set, defined, and recorded by the great creator of the universe to be preserved throughout all history for all mankind to see. Now, when we come back, we're going to take our little break. We got the second video we're going to play. I'm going to talk about, in our Nuggets portion, about the borders of Israel. Come on back. Stay tuned. We're going to show you some very interesting things. So, all right. So now, when we come back, we're going to be talking about Israel's borders. But before we do that, we have this. It's an animated video. This is from the person who, I can't think of his name right now. He actually was the one who was left on the spaceship while they went down to the moon. It's from his perspective of the Apollo landing by Google. Let's play that video. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32.
Hi, I'm Mike Collins, astronaut on Apollo 11. 50 years ago, I went on an adventure which took Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the surface of the moon for the first time in history, while I stayed in orbit 60 miles above them in the command module, which would eventually bring us all home. After a big breakfast, our rocket lifted off in the morning of July 16, 1969. Neil, Buzz, and I felt the weight of the world on our shoulders. It took around 400,000 people to land humankind on the moon. From engineers to computer programmers to the people who sewed airtight spacesuits. We thought our onboard computer was very sophisticated, but in fact it had less computing power than what we all carry around in our pockets today. NASA worked with 3 antennas around the Earth, one in Spain, one in Australia, and one in California. So our team in Houston could see us anytime and tell what our trajectory should be, no matter which way the Earth was turned. We were in constant sunlight between the Earth and the Moon. In order to regulate the temperatures on Apollo 11, we had to perform a maneuver which some called a barbecue roll, in which we rotated sideways like a chicken on a spit. The first time we saw the moon up close, it was a magnificent spectacle. It was huge. The sun was coming around it, cascading and making a golden halo, and filled our entire window. As impressive as the view was of this alien moon seen up close, it was nothing compared to the sight of the tiny Earth. The Earth was the main show. The Earth was it. After a tense descent, in which they almost ran out of fuel, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Neil and Buzz set up an American flag and a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." Behind the moon I was by myself, all alone but not lonesome. If you counted, there were 3 billion plus 2 people on one side and me on the other. I felt very comfortable back there. I even had hot coffee. got back on Earth on July 24th, 1969, and landed in the Pacific Ocean. We were invited to take a tour around the world, and I was amazed that everywhere we went, people would say, we did it. We, you and me, the inhabitants of this wonderful Earth, we did it. Houston, Mike Collins on Apollo 11. Thank you so much for joining me today. Mike Collins out.
I thought it was a really neat video. Audrey shared that with me. I said, yeah, we need to play that this time for everybody, especially for the youth, but they did such a good job. There was one more thing she brought out. I don't know if you noticed it or not. I want to share that with you right now, is they took all the American flags off their uniforms in the spacecraft. And I didn't catch that at first. So if you're watching this video, go back and take a look. Other than him saying he planted an American flag, you had no idea it was America who did it. It's just another one of those things that you just don't want to have patriotism anymore. I watched an interview with Mike Collins on Saturday night, and he was talking about their tour, and he said it was just one of those phenomenal things that is that the people from around the world, and they went to 27 countries, they all felt they were a part of that because everybody was watching it and everybody was praying for their success. Just anyway, a very, very special time. All right, let's get back to our program now. We want to talk about the borders of Israel being set by God. All right, this is in Exodus 23, verse 31. Look what God says. I will establish your borders. What do you think this world and all the Arabs and the other nations in the world, around the world, are so upset with Israel? They're not fighting Israel, they're fighting God. God set his borders over there in that nation. And here's the borders. He said from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, from the desert of the Euphrates River, and I will, from the desert to the Euphrates River, he says, I will give your hands to the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Now, some people have a problem with that, just like America, as they grew, they're about driving out the inhabitants of the past. The inhabitants didn't have to fight. They could accept God and his people, and they would have been able to live. In fact, that's what Israel did. There were several nations in that promised land that God said, leave them alone. They're not against us. That's what's going to happen when Jesus Christ comes back. This world is going to be overtaken by Satan. He's going to drive out those who will not repent and change. We need to get that through our head. God is going to be the author of the establishment of the kingdom of God. That is his land. This earth, this land is his. It's just like Israel and the borders where he put his people. That was designed by God for that time. Eventually, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. That's where I'm going to take this segment to today. All right, so now look at Genesis 12, verses 1 through 4. Now this is beginning to work with Abraham. The Lord had said to Abram, get you out from your country, from your kindred, from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless them that blesses you, and curse him that curses you, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. This was a future prophecy of the coming of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who come through the genealogy of Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So Abram departed from the Lord as he had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. So that was the beginning, working with Abraham. Well, actually his name was Abram at the time, to get him to a land that he was going to show him. All right? So now let's pick it up in Genesis 15, verse 7. So he said to him, I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to inherit. Chapter 15 defines all the God's promises and his covenant with Abraham. I don't have time to read it, but I actually printed it out, but I say I won't have enough time. So this weekend, as part of a Bible study, take some time to go read Genesis 15 and his promises to Abraham. And you will see that all the covenant of God's promises is tied into the land that God was giving him. It's all tied to the land and God's family. All right, let's go on now. God establishes the covenant with Israel, Genesis 17, verses 7 through 9. It says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. Also, I will give you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger. All the land of Canaan is an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Now, from that time that Abraham went out, Hebrews 11 verse 10 says that he looked for a city which had the foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Abraham never found that city. And from that time on, he never built a house. He never settled down. He lived in a tent because he always waited till the day he died for God to give him the house that God said. That won't come to the new heaven and the new earth. So, but he understood what he was looking for wasn't in this earth at this time, which is part of the problem that people today have, because they don't realize that what God's telling us is for the future. In other words, you're building an inheritance by how you live today. So now let's go on a little bit further. The future establishment of Israel given to the descendants of Jacob and Israel. We find this now picking up the story in 2 Samuel. By the time 2 Samuel came along, they are in the promised land, and King David is the king over Israel. At that time, in the promised land, God says this, moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel. It is talking about a future place. This is a type. This is a physical type of the end time when he says, I will appoint a place for my people. Well, I thought we just read that they're in the place. Isn't that where Israel is? Didn't he give us the borders? Yes, that was the physical borders for a physical nation. Why did Abraham not build a house? Because he was still looking for where God is pointing to here to King David. It is the future. It isn't here yet. But God had to have another place, another land set with borders to protect itself as the promises given to Jacob, to Joseph and his sons, so that God could do an end-time work and usher in the return of Jesus Christ for the millennial reign. This is what he's talking about here. So this is talking about a modern-day end-time Israel who's going to bring in the return of Jesus Christ. So now, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them. So they're in the promised land, but he's going to move them. That's what he's saying, which is another reason people misunderstand that over in Israel today, that's not all of Israel, that's Judah. And of course, some of those who were with Judah. But primarily, that's not the entire house of Israel, which is another story for another time. It says, and they will dwell in a place of their own and move no more, and neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. Now, are we here in America being afflicted by wickedness? Yes. So where we are and what God had established is just a physical type again, just like Abraham, pushing it down the road for the final time when God says, no one's ever going to touch you again. In other words, we're going to give you one more place. So you have type, you have America, the land of promise. That's interesting how that works too, because that's what we're called. America's the land of promise. That's the type. Then you have the antitype, or the fulfillment, which is the second part, which is the new heaven and the new earth. No more wickedness. And even God says no more tears, no more death, no more sorrow. And it says that's to be the new heaven and the new earth on Israel's borders. Look at John 14, verses 2 and 3. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I go to prepare a place for you. What place is he preparing? He's looking for the place that Abraham's looking for. You know, Christ said, I'm going to go prepare a place. He says, I'm going to bring it back. So Abraham's going looking for, I'm going to wait for that city. I'm not building on this earth anymore. I'm waiting for my Lord and my Savior. That's what Abraham was doing. He says, if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. So what did God tell us? For the millennial reign, he says he's going to rule and reign on this earth for 1,000 years. Ultimately, the borders of Israel, you ready for this? The borders of Israel ultimately expand. Revelation 21. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. There are, finally, when God says, you're not going to move anymore, you're not going to have any more problems, there's not going to be any problems. What are your borders? Right there, the new heaven and the new earth. There'll be no limit to where God's people will be. And if you look at our sermon series that we've been working on now and we're beginning to expand on, the roaring sea, where it talks about there's no more sea, that means no more evil, no more wickedness, no more fighting, no more bitterness, no more death, no more sorrow, no more sickness. Ultimately, that's where it's going. So why do we see so much fighting in the Middle East? Because when Satan sees the Middle East, what's he looking at? He's looking at his ultimate end. He's not going to be around anymore. By that time, God's going to remove him completely. And his kingdom will come to naught. That's why he's so angry with Israel right now. And that's why he's trying to use every nation on the face of the earth to stop this from going on. Because God's borders are endless. And Israel's borders will be endless when that takes place. You know, I wanted to share that with you. I thought you might like that if you're having a group who meets together. Why don't you do this? Take that little segment, play that little segment, and then sit around and have a Bible study and see what more you can find. You're going to find there's so much more to talk about that I just didn't have time to cover right now. And you're going to find some really interesting things from the Bible from that. All right, here we go. We'll wrap it up. Roaring Seas Part 2 went out last week. And also the sermon by Bobby Weber and Getting to Know the Father from the website that just a couple weeks ago they put out new DVDs on the YouTube and News Nuggets and Insights now being posted on Facebook. So if you got Facebook, you can pass this on to your friends. And what we ask you to do, help us out. Share it with your friends. You know, let everybody you know about News Nuggets and Insights. Well, there you have it. That's it for our program today. So now, as always, I want to close our program with a little upbeat video. Today is I Am With You Always. But before we go to the video, we got to have the shark. Where's our shark? Anybody seen the shark? We need that music. There he comes. Doo-dum, doo-dum. We just do that for the kids. But if some of you grown-ups enjoy it too, just don't let the kids know about it. So anyway, let's take a look at that video. I Am With You Always. I'll be right back to close our program. That's our program for today. Again, as always, from all of us here at God's Unchanging Word, thanks again for watching. And don't forget, share this with all your friends. They're going to love you for it. Or not. Till next week, have a great week and God bless you. Have a great Sabbath.